Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. It's Chief Clock from Bicknell, and today I'll be talking about the top 10 teaching tips that I have for instructors when teaching online. So the first tip that I would like to start with is emphasize your actions. So compared to a classroom setting where cadets would be able to read your entire body language, they only see your upper body. So make sure that they can see your full face, they can see your hands if you're making any hand gestures. So instead of attending a class and they're just hearing you talk like this, and this is how you tie this knot, any questions? Make it engaging, make them want to listen to you, which is my next point. Make sure you fluctuate your tone of voice. It's more important than ever. So if you were in a classroom before, you would have learned to make sure that your tone of voice was good, that you're speaking loud, and that you're speaking clear. These 3 points are more important than ever because when you're online, there's often many barriers. And I don't just mean like virtual barriers like, oh, my Wi-Fi is bad, I can't hear you. I mean, there's obstacles. Like they will be tempted to touch their phones. You might even be tempted to touch your phone. And that is my third point. Um, Make sure that you're being the role model that you expect them to be. So if you're touching your phone, they're going to think, and of course, they're going to think it's okay to touch their phone as well. Um, and often this kind of ties into like a little slogan I have: what you give is what they see. Um, and meaning what I mean by that is that if you're smiling, they'll see that. When you're not smiling, they'll also see that. It's unlike in the classroom where their gaze, where they're looking, will vary from time to time. They might be looking around the room, looking at the whiteboard. But on Zoom, they're given the options to look at everybody, including their classmates, including you. And although that seems intimidating, it's the truth. What you're giving them is how they perceive you. So you decide what they see. Um, the fourth tip is to do with prizes, or a better way to put it is thanking them for their participation. So, the difference from in real life, in person teaching, and online teaching is that you can't give them anything virtual. I mean, you can't give them anything physical. You can only give them something virtual. So, what does that mean? That means that you aren't able to give them candy and give them thanks for participation in the same way that you used to. So, a few tips that I have for that is making the prizes virtual. For example, it would be like for the next class, the cadet is able to um, decide what the icebreaker will be, or the cadet will be able to decide what your profile picture on Instagram will be for the next few days. Something fun and something that is rewarding that will make them want to engage. Um, that leads to my eighth point. Make sure that you have activities that are engaging and that they're not just staring at a PowerPoint for your whole lesson. It's going to be totally different than teaching in person, because in person you would have been able to see who's distracted, who's not paying attention. But online, you can only tell so much. You can tell that they're not looking into the camera, but sometimes that doesn't mean that they're not paying attention. They might just be shy, or they might just be taking notes. You can't really see their entire space compared to before, where you would be able to pull back the cadets who are not focused. So that's a big one. Activities such as polls, even just little icebreakers, little breaks in between lessons that, for example, if you're teaching a knot lesson, you could have a little knot game, a knot competition. It could even be something like, oh, find something in your room and, somehow engage that with the lesson. For example, you have 10 seconds to find a piece of string in your room and teach me how to tie a reef knot, or demonstrate to me that you know how to tie a reef knot. It could be things like whoever's the fastest to draw a sailboat will be the winner. Just things like that get them engaged instead of just staring at the screen. So for my next point is involve pen and paper. So that kind of relates to my point before. Um, in class, they would have had to write notes on paper, but now that you're teaching online, obviously we'll give them the option to write notes on their device. But at the same time, get them engaged. For example, tell them to take out a piece of pen and paper and tell them to do something. Maybe tell them to, as I mentioned earlier, draw a picture of what you're teaching, write down in a key point, because studies have shown that writing down a point helps with muscle memory more than just typing it or repeating it back to someone. So that leads to my next point, which will be interacting on Zoom with the cadets. So interactions on Zoom are pretty limited to the fact that if you're talking to one cadet, all the other cadets can hear. So a feature that you can use if you're trying to just hint to a cadet something, you could also use the private chat feature on Zoom, and you could just communicate that to them. Like ask them, why they're not participating, if they're feeling okay, instead of doing that in front of the whole class, which could be embarrassing for them. My next point would be using reactions and knowing when to tell the cadets to use which kind. So on Zoom, there's reactions such as thumbs up, clapping. What else is there? Thumbs up, clapping, and many more reactions depending on what device the cadets are using or what device you're using. And the thing about those reactions is that they're great if you're asking a general question. For example, raise your hand if you've ever been to the Maritime Museum. Compared to when you're trying to get cadets to really engage in person, like, could you answer or could you do the confirmation for teaching point 1? It might just be easier if you ask them if they understand by raising their thumbs up so that, they move their physical body instead of just telling them to press one button. And, it just seems counterintuitive when you're trying to get them to participate by just clicking one button compared to when they could just be using their facial expressions and their hand signals and all of that, just like I talked about earlier. Now I have 2 more points left. The last point, or the second last point, will be sharing videos. So this is more of a technical aspect or a technical tip. If you're sharing a video with a cadet, with your cadets on your lesson, I would just suggest having the link to the video and sending that to the chat, because some cadets, or sometimes the signals of the Wi-Fi, bandwidth problems from Zoom, just a lot of technical things can get in the way. And it's much easier if you send the link to everyone and then count 1, 2, 3, go, and everyone plays the video, compared to you playing the video, screen sharing with your screen, and it sounding glitchy and the visuals are pixelated. And, I've just found that is a much easier method. Of course, have test it out yourself and see what the cadets think, but that's a big tip from me about technicalities. And finally, the last tip. I mentioned this briefly earlier, but do what you expect cadets to do. Like, if you expect them to use their body language, use yours too. If you expect them to set their name with their first name, last name, and their rank, do that too. If you expect them to respect when you're talking, do the same. So it's pretty much the golden rule. Treat others how you want to be treated. And that's not just applicable on Zoom, it's applicable everywhere, but especially on Zoom, where there's many barriers, communication, technology, and just many more. It's really important to keep in mind that you're the role model and you're the one hosting. It's really easy for cadets to just not show up to class because it's virtual now. It's not as much of a commitment. So it's really important to keep those 10 tips in mind, and I hope this helped. Thank you. Bye.